Hey, and welcome to a new edition of Standard Spike. Sorry I couldn't record last week. I was under pretty good time constraints leading up to the Invitational. But that paid off for me pretty well, as I got second place with this Rug Pod deck. So I thought I would go over the deck and the changes I've made since my original video. And, I mean, a lot of people have been asking me about sideboarding and what I would change. So why not just do this? So the original deck list I played on that video was very untuned, and the sideboard especially was very bad. And the list I have now is really tight, and the sideboard is very good, so we can understand why exactly I did pretty well. In between the Invitational and my first video, I played in the World Magic Cup qualifier with Rugpod, and at the time I was playing Ponder's main deck, and that wasn't very bad actually, it was pretty good, but I found that they didn't perform too well, mostly because of our lack of blue sources. So instead of playing Ponders at the Invitational, I switched to a Daybreak Ranger and a Bonfire of the Damned. Daybreak performed very well for me every time I drew it. And it also wasn't such a bad Birthing Pod target or Zenith target in some cases. Generally, it's too slow to do that, to Pod forward or Zenith for it, because you always have the option of getting Huntmaster instead. But just having the option of getting Daybreak or being able to draw it in some games is actually pretty powerful. And the fact that it also deals with Restoration Angel nicely is also a good reason to have it. The one Bonfire, though, didn't perform too well, mostly because I didn't draw it very often. But this deck never really wanted removal at all, so I can understand why it didn't perform too well. If I was gonna add a card, this would be the one I would cut easily. But right now the deck list is pretty tight, so no cuts or no additions either. And then the next thing I might cut would be Silverheart. It's really only good in two matchups, and that would be Red Green Aggro and Wolf Run Ramp. But when you do play against those decks, it's the only card you want, really. So that would be why I still played main deck. And those decks do still exist in the format, so it's still a fine card to have. That's really the only changes I've made to the deck. The mana base, though, has changed a little bit. I'm up to 3 mountains, and that's because of the sideboard. And then at the Invitational, I played 2 mountains, and that was really greedy. I just didn't realize how greedy it was at the time, because we've got 4 cards that cost double red mana, and we want to cast them as soon as possible. And also, in the matchups that we bring these in, our 1-drops are going to die some of the time. So that mountain is very crucial, and in fact this Wolf Run could even be another mountain, but I'm keeping it a Wolf Run because it gets boarded in whether or not we're boarding in these double red cards sometimes. So I just thought, why not keep it a Wolf Run? So the best part about the sideboard is definitely the Hellrider plan. It lets you, well, first of all, it's a creature that has 3 toughness, so it survives Whip Flare. It also happens to survive Elesh Norn. But it also just lets you go aggressive against the decks that you bring it in against very easily, and you can even clone it for especially a lot of damage. In fact, I got a turn 4 kill with Hellrider in I guess only 1 game, but it happened. I was playing 3 Hellriders at the Invitational, but I wanted to play a hero instead, just to give you extra versatility against Timely Reinforcements and Lingering Souls. Those cards really aren't that amazing against this deck, but when you're on the Hellrider plan and they have 3/1/1s in play, it's pretty hard to attack into that. So I figured, why not play 1 hero? The downside to hero, though, is that it has 2 toughness, and that dies to Whip Flare, Shock, and Elesh Norn. So it's possible Hellrider is just better, after all, but I want to try the 1. And I think the Esper decks that play Lingering Souls are more popular than the decks that play Elesh Norn and Whip Flare. So I think that's an okay card to have. The Hound is probably the loosest looking card in the sideboard, but it's actually really good at what it does. And what that is, protect you from Day of Judgment. So if you have like too many creatures on board, and you don't want to extend into Day of Judgment, you can pot up the Hound instead of a Hellrider. And that way, if they play Day of Judgment, you still have a 6 power creature in play. If they don't play Day of Judgment because you search for Hound, then you have the option of potting that into something better. If you get Conscripts, you can attack for 9 that turn instead of just 4. So it's really just an amazing card to have against Day of Judgment. But really, that's all I want it for. Against red-green, it's actually fine also. Hopefully they're not boarding in Pillar, but if they're not boarding in Pillar, then it's a good way to combat Huntmaster, whereas like getting a Huntmaster doesn't combat Huntmaster at all. Unless, of course, you didn't play a spell that turn, but that doesn't happen every time, so that comes in against them too. It's kind of like Vorapede in some ways, but it doesn't cost 5, and that's the big reason this is better than Vorapede. So, moving on from left to right now. The Ancient Grudge is just an obligatory artifact removal. You can't really go wrong having one of these in your sideboard when you're playing red-green. 3 Arc Trails are for mostly green matchups, mirror matches, and stuff like that. Hits 1-drops and Huntmasters. Consecrated Sphinx it replaced Frost Titan in the original list, which was just, I don't know, I didn't really understand it at all. So Sphinx instead lets you have a 6-drop against control that demands an answer. Inferno Titan is likewise demands an answer, but this one, if they answer it sorcery speed, then you at least get to draw 2 cards. Titan dealing 3 damage is much less relevant. But as a whole, this card doesn't get boarded in a whole lot, and against Delver, I was having a hard time deciding if I wanted it or not, and that's mostly because it gets blown out by Vapor Snag, whereas Inferno Titan at least gets you some removal before it gets Vapor Snagged. So if I had to have room on the board, I might actually cut this card, but I don't know what I would need room for currently. The format is changing, and I haven't really paid attention to it since the Invitational, so that could be a reason to cut it. But right now, I'm just leaving it. 2 Vines and Spider come in against Delver as a ways to deal with Delver and Restoration Angel, and then of course Swords. Basically, this card is versatile enough to bring it against them, and then Spider is very strong. It just kills one of their flyers and then shuts down all of their combat for a while. Very good card to have against them. Hellrider, I mentioned these cards, how good they are. The Wolf Run, 25th land, when your 1-drops die, you bring it in. Against Delver, you bring it in. Against Delver, it's even better because it can deal with phantasmal images, and at the same time just gives you a land to play around Leak with, and if your 1-drops die, just an extra mana source. And then Conscripts, much better than Active Aggression. It's not close at all. This card, just between the fact that you can pod for it, it's a 3/3, and it can take anything. It's just so much better than Active Aggression. So the 3/3 survives, Whipflare, Elesh Norn, and that's a big part of your game plan actually against the decks that do play Elesh Norn, is to Conscripts, survive Elesh Norn, take Elesh Norn, and then attack for, well, that's 9 there, but if you happen to have another 3/3 in play, it adds up pretty fast, especially if it's Hellrider or Hound. You can take Tamiyo or Gideon. Both are insane plays. You can, of course, get a 6-drop with it. So all of these things add up really fast to make this card extremely better than Active Aggression. So that is the entire deck. So I guess we're going to go ahead and dive in to our rounds.